and that you had a good night's sleep and ready to tackle an important topic this morning, intellectual property, although I have to say we won't be necessarily talking specifically about intellectual property, but rather the governance of intellectual property, in particular in relation to Upov, International Union for the Protection of Plant Variety Rights. And to do this, I am joined by a very special panel this morning. We have Marimar Boutreuil, germplasm IP scientist lead at Bayer. Welcome, Marimar. We have Peter Button, Vice Secretary General at Upov, and Minori Hagiwara at the PVP office of the Ministry of Agriculture of Japan. A warm welcome to our three panelists. So, the session title is there a role for breeders in Upov Act 1991? And my first question to you, Marimar, is, why are we asking this question?
Thanks, Jean-Paul.
With the microphone, which should be just behind you. Yeah, it's on, yeah.
Thank you, Jean-Paul, for the introduction. So my name is Marimar Boutreuil, and I'm delighted to be here today, speaking with you and representing the breeding sector. So I believe this question has been asked by ISF because of me being more in the Americas, the number of countries who have not switched from the 1978 Act to the 1991 Act is still very large. And as we are here in this great continent of Africa, there are also many countries who have not joined Upov yet, though there is great hope with the latest entries from Africa. And so I believe the hold-up in many cases, it's because of doubts and uncertainties that came, that people may not necessarily have resolved in realizing if they should or not join this effort, the Act of 91, or enter Upov. And breeders have, for the past 60 years, been in very close connection with Upov, helping explain some of those hold-up items, and have been, in my view, fundamental to get it going, because Upov is here to protect germplasm, to protect plant varieties. It's the only international system that is able to do so. And it's very important to guarantee for the breeding sector that return on their investment. It takes a really long time to develop a variety. It takes years, many times say 10 years, or to decrease that time, a huge investment. And so Upov is here to guarantee that investment in the countries which have adopted it. And so breeders have a role helping Upov in explaining that. However, we have seen that we have lately some hold up from Upov in accepting that help from breeders. And so I think the role for breeders is certainly there. It is the fundamental way that I believe Upov should be conducting its activities, and also just providing that clarity for such countries. And so that's most of what I'd like to remark here.
Okay, so if I turn then to Peter, do you understand why ISF is asking this question, and do you think there is a role for breeders in defending the Upov system?
Okay, thank you, Jean-Paul, and good morning, everyone. Absolutely, I think it's clear the mission of Upov has always been to encourage the development of new varieties of plants, and that's not possible without plant breeders. And our whole aim is to ensure that the system that we have is working and encouraging breeders to invest in developing new varieties using all the means available to them. And yes, I understand the question, because as Mary Mara mentioned, there are a number of issues that are under discussion in Upov. And those are largely being driven by breeders, I have to say. The issues that are under discussion were raised by breeders, and in Upov we're discussing those. And I think that that's crucial, and it's the right way forward. And I also thank Mary Mar, because it's also the other way around. It's not just what Upov can do for breeders, but what breeders need to do to help Upov in its mission. Because, as was pointed out, there are a number of countries in the world, particularly here in Africa, but in other parts of the world as well, that are not yet Upov members or not signed up to the 1991 Act. And it's really crucial that they understand why it's in their interest to become a Upov member. We've done quite some work in Upov to demonstrate the benefits of Upov membership, but it really needs to be supported in the country by the stakeholders, by the breeders themselves, from the private sector, from the public sector, to really explain this is how a country we will benefit through Upov membership. So I think it really needs to be a partnership, Upov looking after breeders and breeders supporting Upov to extend the system to an ever-increasing number of countries.
But if I understood from Marimar correctly, there's a feeling that that role for breeders of defending Upov is not very supported somehow. Do you share that?
Well, I think we certainly in Upov have always been open to the breeders' issues. They're the items that come on to our discussion. Those are difficult discussions because we have many Upov members. We have to bring them all together into a consensus. But I think that it's also the other area that we really do need to explore with you as the breeders, the seed industry, as to how we can work even closer together to really help and assist the development of the Upov system for it to grow. I think we've done some good work on that, but I think there are real opportunities. And the challenges are huge in terms of what all countries are facing in terms of climate change and so on. So there's never a better time for us to explain how crucial plant breeding is going to be to address those concerns. And we, working together, not just breeders and Upov, but other stakeholders as well, we have a huge challenge to make sure we can explain why countries need to develop plant variety protection for their own interest and for the planet as a whole.
Okay, thank you. And Minori said Japan was one of the early adopters, or at least it's been part of Upov for a good 40 years, I believe. How is that debate going on in Japan in terms of, do breeders support the system? Does the system support breeders? Do you have this kind of discussion in Japan?
Thank you, John Paul. So hi again, I'm Minori from Japan. Just a quick, overview of what we are, who we are. Japan has a very vibrant seed sector, private sector, but we also have a very strong public sector that does a lot of research on fruit varieties and stuff. We have very, very valuable fruit varieties, and so we are a government, but we're also a breeder, and that's why I think a lot of the discussion that takes in Upov is very, very, important for us that we get involved. And I just wanted to say a little bit that, Upov, the existence of Upov is a constant reminder that we can do better. There's always new members joining. There's a lot more members than 20 years ago. Times have changed, and I'm having hope. And there's new issues coming up. Yes, EDB, hybrid-assisted material. There's new front lines that we need to pursue. But, the working groups in Upov is my beacon of hope. And I really hope that Japan really continues to show that front line, and showcase that we can do better. And I really want Upov to be a good enforcement tool for IP. And am I supposed to talk about the Japanese legislation?
I would like you now, having said that, to tell us a little bit also about how the legislation is evolving in Japan. With, after 40 years of membership, how are you continuously improving and evolving that legislation in Japan? Yeah.
Well, sorry for starting a little early, but so we just amended our PBP law 2 years ago. And again, the journey for us it took a long time for us to learn too. As our public sector was very strong in terms of research, making new varieties, our goal was to really provide good fruit varieties and agricultural crops to the Japanese farmers in a very cheap price. that was our goal, and IP wasn't really a big thing in the beginning. So it was a learning curve for us. But recently, now that we understand that our varieties are valued, not just in Japan, but many other neighboring countries, that, it is time for us to really, take turns and, really think about how to protect IP. So we did our amendments to really make it better, easier to enforce IPs. And one of it was we banned farm-saving seeds. So that was one of the biggest exceptions that we had for breeders' rights. And it was especially large for fruit varieties. We had a very, very generous exception. And farmers were allowed to, self-propagate without any authorization. And so, and even before the amendment, it was illegal to, sell a self-propagated material. Of course it was illegal, but it was, impossible to trace. So these were the areas where, these Shine Muscat, all these good cherry varieties and grape varieties were sold in the market and, left our country. So we did ban that. It was a lot of discussion in Japan too. We had a lot of NGOs and civil societies going against this, but again, we had to remind them that, without, really protecting IP, how are we to, continue investing in these? Our IP applications are dropping because we didn't protect it, and we need to bring this up. That was how we, constantly debated this. And so the other amendment we had was that we, so after 2020, any applications, the applicant didn't declare at the point of application whether he or she wants to limit export of that propagating material. So that person can designate a country that he or she trusts, or any other country that is not designated cannot be exported unless the person gets an authorization from the breeder. So this is very interesting because we actually created, I know that, people, breeders make contracts and they would limit, export or production areas, but the special part was that this was an exception to exhaustion. So usually exhaustion, the principle of exhaustion is that once you sell it, once the breeder sells it to someone lawfully, that's the end of your breeder's rights. PBR right will not extend any further. But then we said that if this is something that goes against the will of the breeder, this will, this will be the exception to the exhaustion, and PBR rights will still extend. So we said that, if you declare at the point of application that you don't want to export it to this country, then anything that goes against that, will be, against your PBR right, and you can go after it as infringement. And there's also a mandatory requirement for distributors to put on labeling that this is a protected variety that has to be limited in export to, by the breeder and stuff like that. So anybody who doesn't, label that will be penalized. So we did that amendment. We also decided that because there are areas when there's a court case, going after infringements, it's really hard to, preserve plant materials as it was during the registration. Sometimes, our varieties go for like 20 years. But then, some species, like mushrooms, they tend to change in form. And it's very, very hard to, sort of preserve the plant material as it was. And it makes it literally impossible to really, sue in the court case. So we decided to stipulate a presumption clause where it says that, we will presume that this, alleged infringing variety is not clearly distinguishable from a protected variety if they did a comparison with the variety table that was created during the registration. The variety table is, what the PBP office makes in terms of the characteristics they found during their DUS examination. And so we decided that this DUS examination characteristics will represent the characteristics at the time of infringement, and it will be compared with the infringed variety. And so with this presumption, after this presumption is created, then the burden of proof will be handed over to the alleged to really prove that, that isn't the case. So before, it was only up to, the breeder to really, make a case that, this is an infringement. But it's, we sort of, cut that proof into half, so that will be a lot more easier for the breeders to protect their varieties. So I know it's a little long.
So you're describing a system that A, demonstrates an understanding that intellectual property has a clear value for plant breeding, and B, is ready to enforce those rights in a very clear manner. If I go back to Marimar on the more sort of institutional dynamics within Upov, you mentioned the fact that there are still many countries who are not part of Upov, but at the same time Upov has an enlarged membership. I think we're on 78 or so countries now? The question is, do you feel that this enlargement has contributed to create a better understanding and acceptance of intellectual property? Or to some extent, do you think that enlargement in membership has also maybe even weakened some of the concepts within Upov?
So regarding the Upov membership enlargement, it's always, of course, very profitable for the seed sector when we have more members and more countries where there is a certainty for that intellectual property, that return on your investment. And I can say that as someone who advises our business in seed movement, germplasm movement, varieties movement, we will look at a certain country if the company wants to create a new hub for seed production and then export to other countries. And we will then analyze what are the options for IP protection in that country, and if we should advise that our best germplasm, our super elite lines, should move or not into that country. And you can even put that in an algorithm, if you know that the rules are well established within the Upov Act. And so it really has a large impact. So being within Upov is to a country's advantage. And like Minori just mentioned there, even more provisions to allow for that investment to be guaranteed is even more enticing for us to move that elite germplasm there. And so it's very important. But we also see as an organization, as it grows, it needs that funding to really keep itself relevant and well organized and accessible for its members. And so my understanding is, as Upov has been growing, it not necessarily has been growing its budget, and I think that might create a negative impact into that organization and how sustainable it is for Upov to continue to provide that day-to-day advice for the countries which are entering, and there is always a need for revisions, and so Upov also needs to be there for that. So Upov must have a way to increase its budget, and if there is blocking from smaller members who are not necessarily able to pay at a higher capacity, then there is a need for creating that environment or a mechanism for that budget to increase. So it's great to continue increase, but it needs to be sustainable.
Okay, so capacities can be stretched. I don't know if you agree with that, Peter, if you felt that your capacities were a little bit stretched and the budget too limited. But I'd also like you to react to this notion that it's not always easy for a country to join Upov. There are a lot of contentious issues and debates being thrashed out before a country can get on board. And I would assume that even when it's on board, those debates don't completely vanish. And so by having an extended membership, you do also integrate more different notions, different concepts within Upov, different ways of viewing intellectual property as well, potentially. That might make your life quite challenging as well.
Yes, well, maybe just to return to the original question, is this a good thing for Upov to expand? And I think absolutely yes, there's no question about that at all. And not only good for Upov, good for the whole world. As I mentioned before, there are huge challenges. And if we're not encouraging plant breeding, we're all in trouble. So the more countries that are members of Upov, the better. And exactly for the reason you mentioned, it's not really a challenge for Upov because the process to become a Upov member is intensive. All stakeholders in the country are consulted on whether this is the right way forward. They need to understand how the Upov system works. And the process to become a UPOV member requires that they have a law which is fully in line with the UPOV Convention. They need to sign into that. They need to consult to ensure that everyone finds that the right way forward for the country. So when they come into UPOV, it's not the start of the journey. They've already had a long journey up to that point, and a great example is a recent member, Ghana, where it took them 20 years to have that consultation internally before they got to the point of becoming a UPOV member. And that makes UPOV a very strong organization because all the members are committed to the same goals, the same way of operating the UPOV system. So it's only good. Yes, there are, of course, with a larger organization, we need to be able to support countries in operating the UPOV system, and this is really the core of our new strategic business plan. It's been at the core in our strategic business plan for 2 or 3 years now, which is diversifying our income. But in UPOV, we have to be smart. We're a very small organization, so not only are we looking just to increase income, but we're at the same time doing that in a way that's making the system more effective. So the main way that we're diversifying income is through operation of systems like the Upov Prisma online application system, which is making it easier for breeders to apply for protection around the world. So we get income through that system, but because we're making it easier for breeders to use the Upov system. And you know, the work that we'll be doing more further on digitalization in terms of the Upov EPVP, where we'll be digitalizing for PVP officers to operate the system, making it easier for DUS reports to be exchanged. All of this will make it much easier for breeders to use the system. There will really be a UPOV system as opposed to an independent set of national systems. And at the same time, that will generate increased resources for UPOV so that we can really then help not just in guidance, but delivering systems to help UPOV members, but also finding more funding for the organization.
And so we talked about enlarged membership, but there's another dimension of the dialogue, which is how do you integrate civil society into the process and business of UPOV and the development of UPOV. And some of the organizations who are observers or invited to some of these sessions, I understand will have quite a fundamentally different view on the value of intellectual property for plant breeding. Minori, I mean, you've been part of these discussions. Do you think that adds value to UPOV to have this open dialogue?
Yes, yeah. Of course it does. I mean, and it's a very important dialogue. It's just, you know, it brings us to really consider how we communicate. But the fact that IP is fundamental will not change. It's just we have to keep continuously, you know, keeping this dialogue going on. And I think it's interesting because, you know, the countries that we want, I mean, Japan wants to join, like, you know, is all these Asian countries, you know, we want them to join UPOV or at least improve their PVP acts. And, you know, always there's this dialogue with the civil society. But then it reminds me because Japan recently, until recently, was very similar. You know, actually IP was like an evil. You know, we are very indebted in this Confucius idea in that, you know, whoever, you know, back in those days, like actually, I'm from Okayama, and one of these good farmers, you know, found this very good variety of pear, a Japanese pear that grows into this big, very juicy and sweet. And when he found it, he was so excited that he just brought the grafting to other farmers all over Japan. He just traveled to just introduce his grafting so that, you know, other farmers will be able to enjoy it. So this is kind of this episode where it shows that, you know, when you find something good, it is important to, you know, sort of like share it, especially if it is about our agriculture. That was how our mentality. It was always good to share it. And, you know, something to collect money from that was kind of like thought as an evil. But back in those days, people would kind of give you the respect of, you know, by creating that kind of food variety. But now these days, you know, in this global economy, when your, you know, information spreads fast and they can create it in a mass amount, they don't care. You know, they're just waiting for, you know, to steal your idea. And we really need to protect your IP. And actually, so, you know, this is how I tell it to my Asian friend, I mean, neighbor countries that, you know, there's another aspect to this. You know, I noticed that Shy Mascat has left Japan and has been mass-produced in China. But, right now when we look at it, because Shy Mascat was such a very popular and, iconic fruit, that everybody jumped into producing this in China and in Korea. Now they're mass-producing it, that even the farmers who started in the beginning and now have, ways to really, differentiate their Shy Mascat from others by, with their cultivation technique are suffering because the price has dropped and, it's a dumping price. When we always talk about this, if we had IP, it would have been different. Not just the breeder would have, enjoyed the benefit, but also the farmers who work hard, they would also benefit from a good IP protection. This is what I say. And so, I really do think we are in a learning curve. And some of my colleagues who used to, work with, Thailand, Indonesia, and, making them join Upov, it has changed. They tell me that, back then they would just hate Upov, the word Upov, but now, they're kind of understanding a little bit by little. And I'm giving my hopes, because, thanks to Upov, there are impact studies, Vietnam, their application is skyrocketing. It has never dropped since they joined. And, in this time of climate change, the differences will show. If they don't, if Thailand doesn't change their PVP law soon, the differences in terms of climate change will come showing at the agricultural production. So, I will continue to talk about this, and I'm really happy that we are having this dialogue.
And I can hear you're a very strong advocate, and I'm sure you would be a very important player in that dialogue. But Marima, how do you view this opening to civil society within Upov? Because one can understand that there is a dialogue in general, but it's something quite different to integrate totally different views within an institutional process.
Yes, and I think Minori brought a good positive example because when we mention a dialogue, we understand it's a two-way street. Someone talks and someone listens, and both sides can be influenced by that communication. And so I think that was a good example of someone who understood and jumped into the opportunity to spread it over once it saw its value. And so I think what we need to focus on the Upov dialogue with civil society is what is the impact that it's having to Upov, and not thinking that it's all in the same bucket where everybody's trying to help Upov. So we need to select what comments can impact it positively and contribute to its growing and strengthening, while some of these organizations who most objective is to destroy IP and destroy the possibility of protection, then we can listen, but we not necessarily should have them influence in a way that would diminish the impact of Upov. And so, as a suggestion, and I think the issues may come when they are directly involved with items that are being voted through Upov, while not having participated in the discussion. So to narrow that participation to occasions where they can contribute to building up a certain document that will be voted, etc., but not necessarily being there only for that moment of disrupting the discussion. And so, yes, dialogue is great, it needs to be a two-way street, and not necessarily, and it has to be a positive impact. And also we see that members, or not members, but contributors, observers, who are not necessarily using the system, that's where you need to have them involved in the discussion in items that may be relevant for them as well.
The disruptive element is not always what you want when you're trying to have a dialogue. In fact, as a moderator, I can tell you that when I have a disruptive panelist, it's extremely difficult to manage. But maybe, Peter, could you just try and give us maybe a couple of insights into those institutional dynamics between a civil society organization that will be strongly opposed to the very principle of intellectual property for plant breeding, and some of the members of Upov, some of the states who are working with that system? Are there any examples that you could share of that dialogue happening in practice?
Well, Thanks, Jean-Paul. I'm not sure that I would want to go into specific examples, but I think in any organization, you have to be open to feedback, and not just good feedback, but challenging feedback. That's really important. And I think it ultimately, whilst it's challenging, it makes us stronger, ultimately, because it really makes us question, really make sure that we are built on a strong foundation. And I think the evidence is, yes, you have these challenging questions, but when you work your way through those, you come to the conclusion, yes, this is the right way forward. And it's good to be questioned, not to just everyone accept that this is the right way forward. But it's not easy, absolutely. And sometimes it means that you can't get to where you want to go to as fast as you would like. But ultimately, when the issues that they raise are out there, we can see that we can answer them. And that's important for the countries going through this process to know that these questions have been raised. They've been raised for many years. They will be actively raised. We will be challenged. But ultimately, the answer will be the same. Is this a good thing or not? And clearly, the answer is yes. The Upov system is one that will take us forward. We understand the issues that others raise, and we take that into account. But nevertheless, the conclusion, I think, certainly for all the Upov members, is none of them are regretting having joined Upov, that's for sure.
Okay, well, that's already a positive lesson. I also have to mention apologies on behalf of Patrick Ngwedyagi. I forgot to mention that, Director General at the Tanzania Official Seed Certification Institute. He could not be here with us today, but that's fine because it just leaves us extra time for questions. Okay, so we'll get to that in a second. Final question from me. On the issue of technology, because Upov in 1991 is very different from Upov in 2023 in terms of the context of plant breeding and the kinds of tools and technologies that are being used in plant breeding. There are many different ways to protect different parts of a seed. Okay, so I'd like to understand also, how is the technology affecting the institutional and the governance dynamics within Upov, and what you see as a pathway moving forwards there? Maybe Minori first, actually.
Definitely a very, very important question. And I don't know, when you talk about new technology, I mean, even when we were creating Upov 91, I wasn't creating it, but I mean, back then when they were discussing it, that new technology was an issue. And that's why they brought the EDB clause. And it is, at least for Japan, very disappointing that, you know, some of our members were trying to sort of weaken that, because, I mean, we have reader's exception, and the only way we were rescuing it was, you know, EDB clause. So, I mean, and I think it's very important to know that, you know, if someone is using your protected variety and changing that a little bit, and, you know, keeping the almost entirety of it, I mean, you know, there has to be a way for, you know, the original breeder to be recuperated in terms of their, you know, research. But then I guess in the recent talks, you know, they were saying that, you know, if there's even one change in essential characteristics, that would not constitute as an EDB. But then my question is, how are you going to recuperate that investment if, you know, that, you know, change variety can completely, you know, take over the market from the original variety? Then there's no way to recuperate. And so, I mean, for Japan, it is essential that, you know, these new, so-called new varieties will, you know, they have to partner with the original breeder. I think that is a solution that has to be pursued. And the person who is using that protected variety should ask themselves, why am I choosing this protected variety? There's a reason to it. That's because there is value to it. And even if he or she is, you know, changing that one essential characteristics, you have the rest of that essential characteristic there, you know. You have to look into that reality. And I mean, this is just common sense to me, but I mean, I know that, you know, in different countries, there's different ways of IP protection, and not all of us are on the same page, so it is definitely a difficult topic. But I mean, at least for Japan, we believe that, you know, we need to have a good enforcement for EDBs. I'm not sure if that was your question.
It's part of the answer. Certainly part of the answer. I'm sure there are many other parts of that answer. I'd like to hear Marimar as well on that one.
Yes, I think Minori touched on a crucial one. And as said before, Upov has mechanisms to keep itself relevant, to keep itself updated, and one of them is to create those explanatory notes, which will then reveal more about how should it be implemented. And as Upov members are the ones voting, they still are government members and not necessarily involved in the breeding process. So again, the breeding sector needs to be the one helping Upov create such documents, because the technology is being applied in the varieties being deployed by that breeding sector. And while other observers should also be included in listening in that dialogue, we would still imagine and expect that such mechanism through the explanatory notes should include that breeding sector component. And by breeding sector, I do mean public and private, and it's really what we are. You know, we are all users, and we both have access, and not just international companies, but also local companies. And so we are contributing that to that explanation, and should be in a better place if the breeding sector is heard.
But given the changes in technology and the changes in breeding, do you think the current framework is still valid in terms of the way it conceives of plant variety and plant variety protection? Or do you think the technology, because the technology is just going to evolve even quicker, so will that not just put extra pressure on the Upov system already today?
So far, for the topics that have been involving such use of technology, like gene editing or molecular markers, the industry has been helping and advising Upov by the creation of such explanatory notes, and we have been in very great sync. We have been in agreement, we have been connected, and you know, those are two of the topics. There are other topics where perhaps we haven't had yet that opportunity to create that synchronization of thought. But for those topics that are very technological, we have expressed to Upov some of our thoughts, and you know, it's a matter of how can they be voted, how can we be listening to. And I think the framework is good.
Okay, good. Peter, maybe just a comment on this technological challenge potentially to plant variety protection. Do you think there's a need to review or reassess Upov's role there, or do you think, like Marimar, that so far you've been able to survive?
Well, hopefully a bit more than survive. I think the Upov system continues to be totally relevant to plant breeding, and just to take a step back and to pick up what Minori was saying, is that the very concept of the Upov system, it's really important to remember that, and I think you all need to be proud of the way that plant breeders shaped the Upov system. Don't forget, there wasn't a Upov system originally. It was plant breeders, governments that came together to create it, and they had the opportunity to use the existing IP forms, patents, whatever. But no, it was recognized by breeders. They wanted a system that was going to deliver maximum benefit to society. They maybe didn't express it in those terms, but that's why there was a breeder's exemption, to make sure that plant breeding was advancing in the most effective way for everyone, not just for breeders to be able to make their money the quickest they could, but to make sure that plant breeding was making progress. So we need to constantly reevaluate what's happening with technology. Are we still achieving that goal? And technology is moving fast, and we need to understand that governments are not the ones that are users of that technology. So there's an important role for breeders to explain what's happening, to keep us informed. We've had a couple of seminars over the last 2 years to really ensure that the officials responsible for these systems understand what's happening, can start to think about the implications, but it's not easy. And also because some of these technologies are developing people are not willing to share everything they're working on. So I think this is something we have to keep on top of in Upov. We have to be aware of what the developments are. It's not the end of the story. And I think one of the things for the future is really to make sure that we're following this, see what's happening with technology, see what's happening with breeding practices, business models in plant breeding, to make sure that the Upov system is getting it right, to give the greatest advances for plant breeding in order to deliver benefits for farmers and then all of us as people that eat food.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Peter, so time for the audience to start challenging. Over here, can you please briefly introduce yourself?
Yes. Thank you very much. François Burgot from African Sea Trade Association. I just want to go back to what you said at the beginning, how breeders may help Upov. I think the first things to do is to be more vocal. And I take the example of Ghana, you know. My former organization, GNIS from France, felt very alone during 15 years to support the Ghanaian government. And I have to remind you that before to succeed, the government put the draft legislation on Upov 3 times to the parliament. And the 2 first times, all the NGOs were express the danger for biodiversity and so on. And there was nobody from the seed organization, the breeders organization, to talk in the newspaper and to talk in Ghana to the farmers organization. Secondly, we obtained to have in OAPI Upov legislation. How many breeders are using OAPI, are using the possibility to have breeders' rights on their varieties? And I asked to all the multinational companies who are working in West, in countries in OAPI, just to look how many varieties for they ask protection for. And this is very important, you know, because if you push countries to have breeders' rights, and at the end of the day, when they have breeders' rights, you have no change in the number of varieties protected and numbers of varieties on the market, you have a problem, and you give NGOs argument to say, you see, breeders' rights, it doesn't change nothing.
Okay, so not defending the system enough, underutilizing the system when it's put in place. So we'll bear those in mind. I have one comment question here.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Thank you to the panelists. And I think I will take one step back from what Francois said. Oh, I'm Catherine Langat from the Africa Sea Trade Association. And yeah, it's unfortunate that Patrick is not there, because it would have been interesting to hear from an African government perspective how they broke the ceiling to make sure that in the continent, because seed is considered sacred, seed is more of a community good. So how did they do it to make sure that the plant breeders' rights is really enacted? But I would suppose that the panelists may have an opinion, so if they can share that with us, it would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Will you be able to maybe have a go at that one? Yeah? Just keep it for now. I'll go for just behind you as well.
Yes, thank you very much, Jean-Paul. The bottom line, I'm so happy that it was clearly noted that, yes, Upov is essential and will remain essential. So, but given that, you started the whole discussion with the extension of, by the way, Niels Lauwers, Plantum, the Netherlands. You started off the discussion with the extension of membership, which we all are happy about. Marimar noted about the explanatory notes, which are important to make sure that the implementation of Upov can develop further. I have a personal question, and I'm wondering whether the rule for consensus is tenable. Is there a risk that the rule that consensus needs to be obtained, that the risk is that things will not be able to change if just one or two countries oppose a certain explanatory note or the text of a certain note, then, well, it cannot go through. Is that a risk? How do you perceive that? Well, question to Peter primarily, but maybe to all.
Well, I think Peter can definitely have a go at that one. Marimar, can you just maybe respond to Francois on the underutilization of the system?
Yes, so a comment here is, so even when you are a multinational, it doesn't mean you have complete control of our local, how you say, the entity at the local country. And there is also an inertia time when things, happen in one side. By the time that country connects and have enough both resources, because it has to be accountable for everything it does. Even as a global IP, our global IP strategy may be to protect the materials in the countries where we deploy it. It still may take time until that local government, local company entity has enough to protect it. And also because sometimes the germplasm that is there may have been protected more than 4 years ago, in which case it will not be possible for us to protect it because it will be out of that time. And so again, it needs to be initiated. So we heard about Africa having 40% of the population by 2100, something like that. When would those countries have these rules in place so that it would enable investment and so on? It needs to be early enough so that all this movement, all this internal movement in the industry, in the local government, etc., happens so that it's prepared. And even though we may be eager to see it earlier, it's still necessary as a necessary first step for all the other things that will happen later to actually take place.
Okay, so that does make it quite challenging, nevertheless, for the local implementing bodies. Peter, maybe just on the question of consensus, because I think that's quite an important one, with the enlarged membership in mind as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think consensus is crucially important for Upov as an organization, and I don't see it necessarily as being a problem. I think in terms of going forward, what we're looking at in Upov is to get consensus on agreement of an explanatory note, say. But as you've heard, and you've heard from Japan, Upov members can go beyond what is the minimum in the Upov Convention. I think it will be important for us to see what countries do and to see the impact of that. And you will get consensus if you can build and explain and so that people are reassured with the information that they get to look at the impact, then you're much more likely to get consensus to go to a higher level. If you try to force or ignore those that are not willing to go, I think that's quite dangerous. I think we need the strength of Upov is that everyone is on the same page, the same understanding. It's also very important for breeders to have a common understanding of the system. So I think consensus is really crucial. Difficult, but I think important for the strength of the organization. And if I could, Jean-Paul, just come back to Francois' point, because it's a great point about the difficulties to have people in the countries such as Ghana for breeders to explain the benefits. Because the problem is, if you don't have PVP, you don't have breeders other than maybe those that are funded by the public sector. So it's very difficult to find people within the country that can say, we need this system, because they don't exist. No one is breeding if they can't get a return on their investment. And I think that's a challenge also for ISF, is how do we deal with those situations? We have to be sensitive, because it's not good when all this is coming from outside. The strength of Ghana ultimately was they answered these questions internally. But maybe we can do more to show examples how these breeders will evolve in a country if you introduce the PVP system, because they won't exist until you have PVP.
Yep. Perfect. We have a question here.
Yeah, hello everyone, and thank you, the panelists. I'm from Wei Insight Gaoming, and we are an agency that does a cross-border PVR application. So different from the breeders, we are quite familiar with the Upov system. But still, we receive many questions from clients and asking that, how do I make sure my variety is novel and distinct? I mean, there are a lot of ways to check it, but theoretically, our answer is you just don't. You just don't. And this is not a question that can be solved by the Upov per se as an international organization. But also, it is very difficult for it to be done in a just single country. So, for example, like in China nowadays, it is relatively easier to have a distinctive test in the corn, the maize variety, because DNA test is required. Otherwise, there are too many Me Too variety. But it is almost impossible to apply it to every variety, especially for any international kind of application, because it's too costly and still is not a very fair way. So I think my question is that, is there any way that in the near future that you can vision that maybe like the DNA test or something, the common database? I know we already have like somewhat the DNA database, but it's quite small, I would say. So yeah, is that possible that that countries can cooperate on this kind of issue to create a common DNA database? So hopefully it is required, but maybe voluntarily, but definitely there should be an incentive. And second, so I think my second comment or question is that, so in my opinion, the PCT is sort of like a accelerated a kind of mechanism used in patent, and that's one of the biggest achievements made by VIPO. So it's the upper level of the Upov. And so for the PCT, it is a really useful tool for international application in patent, and it is proved very effective and useful. And I think this is also a mechanism that can be used for PVR application. So do you think that here's something we can learn from PCT, and maybe we can have like a pseudo like PCT kind of thing that applied in PVR application? So yeah, that's my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, that's a challenging one for the last question from the audience. Can we try and keep it quite short as an answer on the evolution of identification of varieties with technology?
Okay, thank you. Yes, and I think these are two questions that are occupying Upov nowadays. With regards to the use of new techniques, absolutely. In Upov, there are a lot of discussions. DNA profiling is already being used in Upov members. And as you point out, that there is a requirement for a new variety to be distinct from any other variety anywhere in the world. And so you may think, well, theoretically, that means you have to compare a variety with every other variety in existence. But the reality is somewhat different, because a maize variety in one locality will be necessarily different from a maize variety in another country at a different latitude. So DUS examiners are very knowledgeable about what they need to compare. And certainly for crops such as maize, there's a lot of use of DNA profiling to manage this, and the system is working efficiently on that. And yes, potentially there is in the future the possibility to share DNA profiles. However, there are concerns about confidentiality and so on, but Upov is certainly discussing that and will continue to discuss that. In terms of the PCT-like system, in fact, this is exactly where we're going towards with Upov Prisma, because this is the route. You can come to the Upov website, and there you can make an online application to all the participating countries. It respects their particular national requirements, but it has the advantage you can read it in different languages, Chinese, for example, to see. You can read the application forms for other countries in Chinese, for Chinese breeders, for example. But it's going to go beyond that, really to be a system, and this is what we call this Upov EPVP, because it's one thing just to be able to make the application, but if then it goes into a paper-based system at the national level, then things get a little bit slower, as we heard yesterday. So what we're developing are modules for PVP offices so they can be fully digital. And this is really leveling up within Upov, because the largest PVP offices, the ones with good resources, they have these electronic management systems, but the smaller ones often don't. But we're going to be able to offer this for free to PVP offices to have a top-of-the-range, fully secure system to manage applications electronically, and also to be able to exchange DUS reports much more efficiently for a platform. So there's a lot going on, and it's really exciting what's happening, and maybe in 5 years' time we really will have something even better than the PCT system. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Peter. I'd like to just finish off with something a little bit different. Peter, you've been serving Upov for 23 years, is it? And I'd just like to take a slightly different view on Upov and call it your ultimate point of view. Okay? And I'd like to ask this question to Peter Button, as opposed to necessarily Peter Button at Upov. You know? So it's Peter Button's ultimate point of view. What are your hopes and dreams for Upov? And do you think it's time for a new round of Upov?
Okay, thank you, Jean-Paul. Well, I think the surgery required to disentangle me from Upov is beyond what we could do in the next 5 minutes, because I think for me it's a system that I'm very committed to, and I think also very positive about for the future. And we've had a lot of discussions which have touched on all of this, and I think the future for Upov is really very positive. I think so what is my ambition for Upov? I think absolutely to see membership of Upov grow. There's a total lack of awareness around the world of what's happened in agricultural productivity over the last 5-6 decades, largely driven by the work that you all do on new plant varieties. And that's got to pick up even further for the future. So we really need more and more countries to be Upov members, all countries to be Upov members if we're going to respond to the challenges of climate change. So number one, I'd like to see a lot more countries becoming Upov member, particularly here in Africa, in Asia, so that really there's a good chance we can deal with the challenges ahead. And then maybe internally within Upov, I think and I was just mentioning it in response to that question, it's really an exciting time in Upov, and I'm really enthusiastic and a little bit sad I'm not going to get a chance to be part of that, is the digitalization, because I think we really are going to see an effective Upov system, as opposed to a convention and people signing up to that I can really see, and I really hope that it will be a very, very efficient system. Breeders will be able to make applications very easily. It will be efficient in terms of the examination, sharing DUS reports much more widely, so that really more and more varieties are getting to farmers. We're removing the obstacles, the practical obstacles, and also moving towards a much more harmonized system, removing differences which arose just by chance, but by offering systems that really are efficient. So the policy area is crucial, and we need new Upov member countries to deliver on that. And we in Upov, or they in Upov in the future, I think have a great plan for digitalization to make it happen. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. A warm round of applause for our three panelists. And I would like to hand over to Michael for the conclusions.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Marima, Minori, and Peter, and Jean-Paul. Just very quickly, as a wrap-up also for ISF, because we always said, hey, we should give someone a little bit flavor where we're going at. And think all what is mentioned. Our message to you, please think on co-creation, on future explanatory note at Upov level, that's for sure. That means we count on this, and we need the breeder's voice at Upov in Geneva. But I think one takeaway we have also what's happened in the recent months, we as the breeders sector, we need to be quite more active and an actor at national level with the national PVP offices and with the policy-making bodies. I think that's clearly a takeaway, and you see it here, where we mentioned that we cannot rely on others. We need to be the voice, and we need to be very clear the voice. Minori, you mentioned very well what we have to say. At the end, we need to use your talking points to convince the other PVP offices around. I think the other point is also that's a collaborative effort. We speak a lot about collaboration, but also on the breeder sector and the private sector side. You see here with all we are working together, SAA, AFSTA, Euroseeds, and APSA, we have to work together as one voice of the breeders around the world. We include here also CropLife International and CIOPRA. I think that's important, that also we are seen as a unique voice and we can promote our interest. So, I cannot stop here, I know time is running. Peter, it's your last official meeting with us. And it is clear for us, not only 23 years at Upov, but you were even more linked with us before because you worked for the British Blind Society. That means a member of the International Seed Federation. That means that's many years of strong and trustful collaboration. And therefore for us it's also, we would like to thank you here in the name of all present here, and we really appreciate, I know you had a new policy of less carbon footprint travel in the recent years, but we are really happy that you're here. So, here you see something you know, because you have some links with Minori's country, the bonsai tree. So, that's a small gift. It's a small gift, but an important gift. And you only get it when you left Upov, that there is no conflict of interest or I don't know what else. That's not seen that we are influencing you. But I think from our side, you know the meaning also of a bonsai. That means we are hoping that in October, that you get your serenity, you enjoy life, you will not forget us, I hope, but you really profit. And you're looking for other perfections. You were the perfect Secretary General of Upov, but you have many other things, I imagine, for the future. And I hope we will stay in contact also. But that's really from the seed sector for you, to thank you for all what you have done and this trustful relationship. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So we will be back this afternoon with plant breeding innovation at 2:30 p.m. in the same room. Okay, see you later.